Mayday, mayday, both pilots are unconscious. Does anyone on this flight know how to fly? That's how British Airways Flight 214 became international news. But to understand how we got there, how 200 passengers ended up at 37,000 feet with no conscious pilots, we need to go back 4 hours to the beginning of what should have been a routine flight. Before you watch full story, comment below. From which country are you watching? Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Lagos, Nigeria, 11:30 p.m. February 12th, 2024. Gate 14 at Murtala Muhammad International Airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of boarding. 200 passengers shuffled through the jetway, carry-on bags bumping against shoulders, boarding passes clutched in hands, that familiar pre-flight energy filling the air. British Airways Flight 214 to London Heathrow. Scheduled departure 11:52 p.m. Estimated arrival 6:15 a.m. local time. A routine overnight service. The kind of flight that happens thousands of times every day around the world without incident. Inside the Boeing 767, flight attendants moved through their practiced choreography, greeting passengers with professional smiles, helping with overhead luggage, checking seat assignments. The lead flight attendant, Grace Adeyemi, 20 years of experience, had done this same routine at least 5,000 times. Welcome aboard. May I see your boarding pass? Row 23, straight back on the left. Enjoy your flight. The passengers were exactly what you'd expect on a Lagos to London overnight flight. Business class filled with executives in expensive suits, already opening laptops to work through the flight. A wealthy Nigerian family, mother, father, and 3 children, settling into their premium economy seats. Students heading to UK universities, excited and nervous. An elderly British couple returning from visiting their daughter in Nigeria. A group of medical professionals heading to a conference in London. Row 12. A woman traveling alone, already pulling out a neck pillow and eye mask. Row 18. A young couple holding hands, whispering about their honeymoon plans. Row 23B. A businessman in his 50s, immediately reclining his seat and closing his eyes. Row 23C. A small girl climbed into the window seat, 12 years old, maybe 4'8", thin frame swimming slightly in a too-stiff purple dress that looked brand new and completely out of place. Tight cornrow braids woven so perfectly they must have taken hours. Worn brown sandals that had seen better days, the straps frayed, soles thin. She carried a faded blue backpack with one strap held together by safety pins, and when she sat down, she carefully placed it under the seat in front of her before pulling out a book. Not a children's book. Not a novel, an advanced multi-engine commercial flight operations manual, 600 pages. Dense technical diagrams of instrument approaches, emergency procedures, system failures. The businessman in 2003B glanced over and smiled. Quite the heavy reading for a young lady. The girl looked up with serious dark eyes. I like to understand how things work. Your parents must be pilots? My uncle is a pilot, she said carefully. Which was true, though incomplete. Well, maybe you'll be a pilot someday too, the man said kindly before closing his eyes to sleep. The girl said nothing. She just returned to her manual, small fingers tracing technical diagrams of hydraulic systems and redundancy protocols. If the businessman had known what those words meant, my uncle is a pilot, if he'd understood the full story behind this small girl reading advanced flight manuals, he might not have been so quick to dismiss her. But he didn't know. Nobody on this aircraft knew. And in 3 hours and 47 minutes, that ignorance would nearly kill them all. Up in the cockpit, separated from the passenger cabin by a reinforced door and a world of responsibility, Captain Samuel Okafor completed his pre-flight checks. 42 years old. Close-cropped, graying hair, calm, confident demeanor that came from 15 years of flying commercial aircraft. 4 gold stripes on his shoulders indicating his rank as captain. British Airways uniform pressed and perfect. This was his 3,247th commercial flight. He could do the pre-flight routine in his sleep. Fuel quantity, he called out, 48,000 pounds. Good for 6 hours plus reserves. First Officer Rebecca Hayes responded from the right seat. 28 years old, enthusiastic, competent. This was her 3rd year flying the Boeing 767, and she loved every minute of it. 2 gold stripes on her shoulder. Still relatively new, but skilled and professional. They ran through the checklist together with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had flown together dozens of times before. Flight controls, checked and free. Flaps, set for takeoff. Pressurization, set and armed. Anti-ice, as required. Down the list they went, every system, every switch, every gauge. Aviation was all about redundancy and double checking. You didn't skip steps, you did it right, every single time. Samuel glanced at the passenger manifest on his tablet. 203 souls aboard, including crew. Among them, his niece Amara, seated in 23C. He'd specifically requested she be seated there, far enough back that passengers wouldn't connect her to him, close enough that he knew exactly where she was. Professional boundaries, he'd explained to her. When I'm in uniform, I'm a captain, not an uncle. She'd understood. She always understood. What nobody else understood, what nobody could know, was what Samuel and Amara had been doing together for the past 4 years. But that secret was about to come out in the worst possible way. At 11:52 p.m. exactly, British Airways Flight 214 pushed back from the gate. The Boeing 767's engines spooled up with that familiar rising whine. Ground crew disconnected the pushback tug. The aircraft rolled backward, turned, lined up with the taxiway. Inside the cabin, flight attendants performed the safety demonstration that barely anyone watched: seatbelt fastening, oxygen mask deployment, emergency exits, life vest locations. Passengers scrolled phones for the last few minutes before the electronic devices must be turned off announcement. Final text messages sent. Love you, landing tomorrow morning. Flights on time. See you at Heathrow. Wish me luck at the interview. Normal, routine, ordinary. The 767 taxied to runway 18R, waited its turn behind 2 other departures. Advanced to the hold short line. Tower clearance. British Airways 214, runway 18. Right, cleared for takeoff. Samuel's response: cleared for takeoff, runway 18, right, British Airways 214. Rebecca's hands went to the throttles. Throttles advancing. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated down the runway. 80 knots, 100 knots, V1, the point of no return, too fast to stop safely. Rotate, Samuel called. Rebecca pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose lifted, the main wheels left the pavement. The Boeing 767, all 130 tons of it, climbed into the dark Nigerian night. Positive rate, Samuel confirmed, watching the altimeter climb. Gear up, Rebecca responded, raising the landing gear lever. The massive landing gear retracted into the belly with a series of heavy thuds. The aircraft climbed smoothly, banking slightly to the right as it followed its departure procedure. Below, Lagos spread out like a blanket of lights, millions of people going about their evening, completely unaware that above them a routine flight had just begun that would end in the most extraordinary way imaginable. In seat 23C, Amara watched the city fall away below. She knew exactly what was happening in the cockpit right now because she'd seen it hundreds of times, knew the sequence, knew the procedures, knew the sounds and the sensations. She knew Uncle Samuel would be trimming the aircraft for climb, knew Rebecca would be setting the autopilot once they reached their initial altitude, knew they'd be contacting departure control to check in. She knew all of this because Samuel had taught her. For 4 years, he'd taught her everything he knew about flying, illegally, secretly, necessarily. And tonight, all of that illegal training, every hour, every landing, every emergency procedure he'd drilled into her, would be the only thing standing between 200 passengers and death. To understand what happened on Flight 214, you need to understand who Amara Okafor was, not the 12-year-old girl in seat 23C reading a flight manual. The other, Amara, the secret one. The one with 847 flight hours. It started 4 years earlier when Amara was 8 years old. She lived in a small village 30 miles outside Lagos, the kind of place that doesn't appear on most maps, just a cluster of houses along a red dirt road surrounded by fields of cassava and maize. Life was simple and hard. Her father had died when she was 6 motorcycle accident on the highway to Lagos. A truck driver falling asleep at the wheel drifted into his lane. Instant death. Her mother, Blessing, was left to raise 3 children alone on a seamstress's income. Blessing sat at her old manual sewing machine 12 hours a day, making school uniforms for children whose parents could afford them, while her own children wore clothes with careful patches and neat repairs. Amara was the middle child, Older brother Chike, 14, helped with farming work to earn money. Younger sister Adaze, only 4. Amara helped care for Adaze while studying at the village school, where 30 students shared 5 textbooks. Money was always tight. Food was always just enough. Never more. Clothes were worn until they fell apart, then carefully mended and worn some more. But Uncle Samuel visited occasionally, perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, and when he did, he brought hope. He'd arrive in a taxi from Lagos, wearing his pilot's uniform, 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders, and suddenly their small house felt less poor. He brought gifts, school supplies, new shoes for the children. Money for school fees, money for house repairs, food, real meat, not the scraps they usually ate. But more than the gifts, Samuel brought stories. He'd sit in their tiny living room, and Amara would curl up at his feet, and he would tell her about flying, about seeing the sun rise above the clouds while the earth below was still dark, about flying over the Sahara Desert, watching sand dunes create patterns like frozen waves, about landing in London, Paris, New York, cities she'd only read about in school. Flying is like magic, he'd tell her, but it's better than magic because it's real. Because humans figured out how to do something that should be impossible. We looked at birds and said, we want to do that too. And we did. Amara loved these stories more than anything. She'd lie awake at night, imagining the cockpit, the clouds, the freedom of the sky. Then one day, when Amara was 8, Uncle Samuel said something that changed everything. Amara, would you like to see where I really fly? Not just the big airports, somewhere else, somewhere secret. Her eyes went wide. Yes, please. He took her on a 2-hour bus ride to a small, unofficial airfield outside Lagos. Not the gleaming international airport with its terminals and jetways. This was different. A dirt runway, a few corrugated metal buildings, several small aircraft tied down under the brutal West African sun. One aircraft stood apart from the others, an old Cessna Caravan. Single-engine turboprop, painted white, though the paint was fading and peeling. The registration numbers had been crudely painted over with more white paint. This is mine, Samuel said. Well, partially mine. I share it with another pilot, but this is where I fly my other job. You have 2 jobs? Amara asked. Samuel nodded seriously. The airline job pays my bills. But this job, this saves lives. He explained his secret work. During his days off from British Airways, he flew humanitarian missions to remote villages across West Africa. Using this old Cessna, held together with duct tape, spare parts, and prayers, he delivered medical supplies to places with no roads, no infrastructure, nothing but dirt airstrips carved into the bush. Villages where children died from malaria because medicine couldn't reach them in time. Villages where people died from snake bites because there was no anti-venom. Villages where pregnant women died during childbirth because there were no surgical tools. Samuel flew to these places and delivered what they needed. Medicine, equipment, supplies. He didn't charge money. Didn't file flight plans, didn't request permissions from aviation authorities. Completely illegal. Why is it illegal if you're helping people? 8-year-old Amara asked with a child's perfect logic. Because the government says I need special permissions, special certifications for the cargo. Because the villages I fly to aren't official airports. Because I don't pay the fees and taxes they want. Because I fly across borders without customs clearance. He sighed. They have their reasons, but while they process paperwork, people die. So I fly. He flew malaria medicine during outbreaks when waiting for official channels meant children would die. He flew snakebite antivenom to areas where treatable bites killed people because no hospital was close enough. He flew surgical equipment to rural clinics. Vaccines, blood for transfusions, antibiotics. How many people have you saved? Amara asked. Samuel thought about it. I don't know exactly. Hundreds. Maybe thousands over the years. Then you're a hero, she said simply. Illegal hero, he corrected with a sad smile, but still illegal. That day, Samuel let her climb into the Cessna, let her sit in the right seat, the co-pilot's seat, let her touch the controls, and something extraordinary happened. He started explaining the instruments, the controls, the systems, and Amara understood all of it. Not in the way a child memorizes facts for a test, but in the way some people just intuitively grasp mechanical systems. She understood cause and effect. She understood that moving the yoke didn't magically move the plane. It moved cables, that moved control surfaces, that changed airflow, that created forces that moved the plane. She understood the chain of mechanical events. Uncle, why would the airplane want to turn left when we add power? She asked after he'd explained the throttle. Samuel stopped talking and stared at her. What? How do you know the airplane wants to turn left? Because the propeller is spinning this way, she demonstrated with her hand, so when it pushes air backwards, it must create a force that turns the plane. Like when you spin around holding a rope with a bucket on the end, you have to lean the other way to stay balanced. Samuel felt his mouth drop open. That was torque effect, P factor. Concepts that student pilots struggled with for months, and his 8-year-old niece had just reasoned it out from first principles in 30 seconds. That was the moment Samuel made a decision that was either brilliant or completely insane. Amara, he said carefully, what if I taught you to help me, to be my co-pilot? Her eyes went wide as dinner plates. Really? Really? But it would be our secret. Your mother can't know, the airlines can't know, the government definitely can't know, and you'd have to work very, very hard to learn everything. Can you keep a secret? Can you work hard? Yes. Can you be serious and careful and never ever do anything stupid? Yes, Uncle Samuel, I promise. And so it began. At first, it was just educational. Samuel would take Amara on his humanitarian flights, but only as a passenger. She'd sit in the right seat, watch him fly, ask questions. But Amara was different from any student pilot Samuel had ever seen. She didn't just memorize procedures, she understood them. When he explained how to trim the aircraft to maintain altitude without constant pressure on the yoke, she immediately grasped that trim adjusted the neutral point of the control surfaces. When he taught her about weight and balance, how loading the aircraft affects the center of gravity, she asked intelligent questions about moment arms and leverage. When he explained stall recovery, she understood it wasn't about altitude, it was about angle of attack and airflow over the wing. By age 9, she was holding the controls during flight, with Samuel's hands hovering nearby, ready to take over. She'd make small corrections to heading, she'd adjust altitude, she'd change power settings. By age 9.5, she was making takeoffs and landings on dirt strips, with Samuel coaching but not touching the controls. Add a little power, Amara. Keep the nose straight with rudder. Feel the controls get lighter? That means we're getting close to flying speed. Gentle back pressure. There. We're flying. Her first solo landing happened when she was 10 years old. They were delivering malaria medicine to a remote village in Niger. The strip was short, rough, with a nasty crosswind. Samuel was flying the approach when suddenly he needed to use the small chemical toilet in the back of the aircraft. Food poisoning. It happened sometimes when eating in remote areas. Amara, can you hold us steady on approach for 2 minutes? Yes, Uncle. She took the controls, maintained the approach path, corrected for the crosswind, adjusted power to maintain airspeed. Samuel returned 30 seconds before landing, but Amara was so focused she didn't notice. She completed the landing perfectly. Crosswind correction. Touchdown on the main wheels, holding the wing down into the wind as they rolled out. Samuel stared at her as they taxied. Amara, how did you learn to do that? I watched you, she said simply. And I practiced in my head. Every night before sleep, I imagine flying. I imagine the instruments, the feel of the controls, the sound of the engine. I practice in my mind. She was a natural, not in the sense that it was easy. She worked incredibly hard, but in the sense that flying made sense to her in a way it didn't for most people. By age 11, she'd logged 600 hours. She could land on strips that made experienced bush pilots refuse to attempt them. Short strips under 1,000 feet. Rough strips, rocks and ruts that could tear off landing gear. Strips on hillsides where landing meant flying toward a mountain wall. Strips so narrow that one wrong move meant crashing into trees. She developed a reputation. The villagers started calling her the skybird who brings medicine. They'd see this old Cessna land in impossible conditions, and a small girl would climb out carrying medical supplies. Some thought she was blessed by spirits. How else could a child so small land an airplane in such impossible places? The name stuck, Skybird. Samuel encouraged it. Even started using it on informal radio frequencies when other pilots were around. This is Skybird, 5 miles south, landing in 10 minutes. The aviation authorities across Nigeria, Niger, and Mali started noticing. Reports came in of an unauthorized aircraft landing in remote areas. No flight plans filed, no radio contact with control towers, no registration visible on the aircraft, and witnesses sometimes reported a child as the pilot. The authorities thought it was a mistake. A small pilot, perhaps. Or someone very young looking. But surely not an actual child. That would be insane. They tried to track Samuel's Cessna. They set up checkpoints at known small airports. They monitored frequencies. But Samuel was careful. He'd removed the registration numbers. He flew low to avoid radar. He only operated at night or in bad weather when authorities weren't actively patrolling. He used village networks to know when inspectors were coming. For 3 years, Skybird was a ghost. An unauthorized pilot that aviation authorities knew existed but couldn't identify or catch. In those 3 years, Amara and Samuel delivered medical supplies to over 200 villages. They flew during epidemics, they flew during the rainy season when roads became impassable rivers of mud, they flew during the dry season when dust storms reduced visibility to nothing. They saved lives. Conservative estimates put the number at over 2,400 people who received critical medical treatment specifically because Skybird delivered supplies that no one else could or would deliver. Children who survived malaria because Amara flew medicine through a thunderstorm when no other pilot would fly. Farmers who survived snake bites because Samuel and Amara landed on an 800-foot strip to deliver anti-venom. Women who survived childbirth complications because surgical equipment arrived just in time. People who lived because a middle-aged captain and a small girl decided that saving lives mattered more than following rules. But all illegal operations eventually end. And for Skybird, the end came suddenly. 2 weeks before Flight 214, Samuel came to Amara's village unannounced. He arrived at night, which was unusual. He looked worried, tired. Amara's mother, Blessing, made him tea while Amara sat at the table, a flight manual open in front of her. "Samuel, what's wrong?" Blessing asked. He sighed heavily. "We need to stop the flights. The authorities are getting too close." Amara felt her stomach drop. Samuel explained. The aviation authorities had become more aggressive. They'd set up permanent checkpoints. They were using better radar systems. They'd started questioning village leaders. "Last week, they almost caught us," Samuel said. "We landed in Mali to deliver tuberculosis medicine, and when we took off, there was a police helicopter waiting nearby. We only got away because of bad weather." "Samuel, this is good news," Blessing said firmly. "This insanity should have ended years ago. My daughter is 12 years old. 12. She should be in school, learning mathematics and literature, not flying illegal medicine runs." Samuel nodded. "I know. You're right. That's why I'm here." He looked at Amara, and his eyes were sad. "Amara, I'm taking you to London. My sister, your Aunt Helen, lives there. She has a good job, a nice house. She's agreed to take you in. You'll go to a real school. You'll be safe. Legal. Normal." Amara said nothing. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Blessing hugged her daughter. "Sweetheart, this is good. This is what you need. A real education. Real opportunities." But Amara wasn't crying because she'd miss her mother, though she would. She was crying because flying wasn't a hobby for her. It was her identity. The villages needed her. The children who survived malaria because she delivered medicine needed her. The people who lived because she landed on impossible strips needed her. But she understood. The operation was ending. Her flying career, illegal, unrecognized, but absolutely real, was over. "I've bought you a ticket on my next London flight," Samuel said. "I'll be flying the plane as captain. You'll be a passenger. It'll be strange for you, sitting in the back while someone else flies. But it's time, Amara. Time to let go." She nodded, unable to speak. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the familiar sounds of her village, thinking about all those hours of flying. 847 hours logged in Samuel's secret logbook. 847 hours that officially never happened. She thought about the dirt strips she'd landed on, the storms she'd flown through, the mountains she'd navigated around in the darkness. She thought about the faces of the people they'd helped, the mothers who thanked her with tears in their eyes, the village elders who called her blessed, the children who ran to meet the plane knowing that Skybird brought help. All of that was ending, and she had no idea that in 2 weeks, on what was supposed to be her final flight, she would need every single one of those 847 illegal hours. British Airways Flight 214 climbed smoothly through 10,000 feet, then 20,000, then 30,000. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers unbuckled, retrieved laptops and books, adjusted seats into comfortable positions for the long flight ahead. Flight attendants began the service. Drinks, snacks, dinner for those who wanted it, chicken or pasta, the eternal airline choice. In the cockpit, Samuel and Rebecca had the aircraft on autopilot, tracking its programmed route perfectly. The computers were flying the plane now, maintaining altitude, heading, and airspeed with precision no human could match. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. At 1:47 a.m., 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Sahara Desert, the flight attendants served the pilots their crew meals. Standard procedure. Pilots ate different meals than passengers, and the captain and first officer ate different meals from each other to reduce the risk of food poisoning affecting both pilots simultaneously. Samuel got chicken. Rebecca got pasta. They ate quickly, efficiently, while monitoring the instruments. The chicken tasted slightly off, but Samuel ate it anyway. He was hungry, and in-flight crew meals were never gourmet quality. You learned not to be picky. At 2:15 a.m., Samuel felt the first twinge in his stomach. Nothing serious. Just a small cramp. Probably nothing. At 2:30 a.m., the cramp became sharper. At 2:45 a.m., Rebecca said, "Captain, I'm not feeling well." Samuel looked at her. Her face was pale, slightly greenish. "The pasta? My stomach is—" She stopped, hand going to her mouth. Then they both realized it simultaneously. The crew catering. Both their meals had come from the same catering service in Lagos. The service that had been cited twice in the past year for improper food storage. Food poisoning. Both of them. "I need to use the lavatory," Samuel said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. He made it to the small cockpit bathroom just in time. He was violently ill for 4 minutes straight, his body purging the contaminated food. When he finally emerged, pale and sweating, he felt dizzy and weak. Rebecca was bent over a sick bag, her face greenish white. "Captain, we need to declare an emergency." Samuel nodded, reaching for the radio microphone with a shaking hand. His vision was starting to blur. Severe food poisoning could cause rapid dehydration, especially at altitude where the air was incredibly dry. "London Control, British Airways 214, we have a medical emergency, both pilots experiencing severe illness. Request immediate—" The cockpit spun. Samuel's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor between the two pilot seats. Rebecca tried to reach for him, tried to key the radio to continue the transmission, but her own body was shutting down. The room tilted. She slumped forward in her seat, unconscious. The Boeing 767, carrying 200 passengers and crew, was now flying on autopilot with no conscious pilots at the controls. The aircraft continued flying its programmed route, perfectly stable at 37,000 feet. The autopilot was doing its job, maintaining altitude, heading, and airspeed. But autopilots can't land. They can't respond to air traffic control. They can't handle emergencies. And in approximately 4 hours, this aircraft would run out of fuel over the Atlantic Ocean. Then it would descend into the sea, killing everyone aboard, unless someone took control. Senior flight attendant Grace Adiemi had been flying for 20 years. She'd handled medical emergencies, difficult passengers, technical problems. She was calm, professional, experienced. But when she discovered both pilots unconscious in the cockpit at 2:52 a.m., her professional calm almost broke. Almost. She'd gone to check on them because they hadn't responded to her intercom call. The cockpit door had a special code that flight attendants could use in emergencies. She'd entered the code, opened the door, and found Captain Okafor unconscious on the floor and First Officer Hayes slumped in her seat. Grace checked their pulses, both alive, both breathing, but completely unresponsive. She tried shaking them, calling their names, splashing water on their faces. Nothing worked. She looked at the instrument panel, a bewildering array of lights, switches, screens, and gauges. The autopilot light was on. The aircraft seemed stable, but Grace had no idea how to fly a plane. She made the hardest decision of her career. Closing the cockpit door behind her, she returned to the cabin and picked up the PA microphone. Her hand was shaking slightly as she keyed it on. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Her voice was calm, professional, but something in her tone made sleeping passengers wake up immediately. "We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Both of our pilots are currently unable to fly the aircraft. If there is anyone aboard with aviation experience, licensed pilots, flight instructors, military aviators of any kind, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. The cabin erupted. People sat up, looking around in confusion and growing panic. What does she mean, both pilots? Who's flying the plane? Oh my God, are we going to crash? A businessman stood up, face red with anger. This is unacceptable. How can both pilots be sick? A woman started crying, holding her young daughter. Please, someone help us. The baby that had been crying earlier began screaming now, picking up on the panic of the adults. Grace repeated her announcement, keeping her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. Please, if anyone has flight experience of any kind, we need you now. Please identify yourself. She waited. Seconds passed. 10 seconds. 20. Nobody responded. A man in row 15 stood up. I've played a lot of flight simulator games. Maybe I could? We need actual flight experience, sir, Grace interrupted gently. Thank you, but please sit down. Another man, my brother-in-law is a pilot. I've watched him fly. I think I could. Actual training, sir. Actual experience. More silence. Grace felt desperation rising. There were 200 people on this aircraft, and not one of them was a pilot. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that there was a pilot on board. A pilot with 847 flight hours. A pilot who had landed in conditions that would make professional pilots refuse to fly. A pilot who had saved thousands of lives. But that pilot was a 12-year-old girl in seat 23C who wasn't supposed to exist. And Amara Okafor was facing an impossible choice. Amara heard the announcement and knew immediately what had happened. Food poisoning. Uncle Samuel had eaten the contaminated catering. She'd once seen him get sick after eating at an airport in Mali. She knew the risks. She knew exactly what was happening in the cockpit right now. The aircraft was on autopilot, maintaining its programmed altitude and heading, but autopilots can only follow instructions. They can't make decisions, can't handle emergencies, can't land the aircraft. She knew they had about 4 hours of fuel remaining. She knew that when the fuel ran out, the engines would stop and the aircraft would begin a gradual descent into the Atlantic Ocean. She knew 200 people would die unless someone took control of the aircraft. And she knew, absolutely knew, that she was the only person on this airplane who could fly it. But revealing herself meant exposing everything. If she walked to that cockpit and said, I can fly this plane, what would happen? Samuel's illegal operation would be exposed. The authorities who had been hunting Skybird for 3 years would finally discover her identity. Her uncle would lose his airline career, the job that supported his family, that paid for his children's education. She would lose everything. Her 847 hours would be publicly exposed as illegal. She'd never be allowed to fly again. She'd be famous as the child who broke every aviation law. Her family could face criminal charges. Her mother might be accused of child endangerment for allowing it. Uncle Samuel would definitely face criminal prosecution. And those villages they'd helped? The operation that saved 2,400 people? It would all be condemned as reckless, illegal, dangerous. Never mind that people lived because of what they did. The law was the law. 200 lives on this airplane versus everything she and her uncle had built. Amara sat very still in seat 23C, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Around her, the cabin was descending into chaos. A mother 2 rows ahead was holding her baby, tears streaming down her face, whispering prayers. An elderly couple across the aisle were clutching each other's hands, the old man's eyes closed, his lips moving in silent prayer. A teenage girl was recording a message on her phone. Mom, Dad, if you see this, I love you. The pilots are sick. I don't think we're going to make it. I love you so much. A businessman was typing frantically on his laptop, maybe a will, maybe final messages to his family. People were crying, praying, holding each other. Some sat in stunned silence. Others were hyperventilating with panic. These were real people, real lives, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, grandparents, children with futures that were about to be erased. Amara looked down at the flight manual in her lap. She'd been studying the Boeing 767 systems for months, preparing for this trip, wanting to understand the aircraft Uncle Samuel was flying. She knew the systems. She knew the procedures. She knew she could do this. But should she? Was saving 200 lives worth destroying everything? Then a small voice spoke up from the row behind her. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, asking his mother a question that cut through Amara's thoughts like a knife. Mommy, are we going to die? The mother tried to comfort him, but her voice broke. I don't know, sweetie. I don't know. Amara made her decision. She closed her flight manual carefully, as if closing a chapter of her life. She stood up on shaking legs. She took a deep breath, and she walked to the front of the aircraft. Grace was standing near the forward galley, trying to figure out what to do next. Should she try the radio? She didn't know the frequencies or procedures. Should she try to wake the pilots again? She saw a small figure approaching and prepared to tell another child to sit down. Then she saw the girl's eyes, serious, determined, not panicked like everyone else. Sweetheart, please go back to your... I can fly the plane, Amara said quietly. Grace blinked. What? I can fly this aircraft. I need to get to the cockpit. Right now. Grace stared at this tiny 12-year-old girl with cornrow braids and a too formal purple dress. Honey, this isn't the time for jokes. I'm not joking. Amara's voice was steady, calm, almost eerily so. I have 847 flight hours. I know how to fly. I can land this aircraft. But I need to get to the cockpit now before we run out of time. Grace's mind spun. This was insane. This had to be a child's fantasy, some confused idea based on watching movies or playing video games. But something in the girl's eyes stopped her from dismissing it immediately. What's your name? Grace asked. Amara Okafor. Grace's eyes widened slightly. Okafor, like the captain. He's my uncle. He taught me to fly. We need to go now. Grace made a split-second decision that would either save 200 lives or be the worst mistake of her career. Come with me. She led Amara to the cockpit, entered the emergency code, and opened the door. Amara stepped inside and immediately began scanning the situation with the efficiency of an experienced pilot. Uncle Samuel was still unconscious on the floor between the pilot seats. First Officer Rebecca was slumped in the right seat. The autopilot was engaged. She could see the AP light illuminated on the mode control panel. The aircraft was stable at 37,000 feet, maintaining heading and airspeed. Then she saw Uncle Samuel's flight bag on the floor, knocked over in his collapse. Documents had spilled out. Grace saw them too and picked up the top sheet. Humanitarian flight logs. Confidential, her voice getting quieter with each line. Pilot. Captain Samuel Okafor, CO Pilot, Skybird. Identity protected. Flight hours logged. 847 routes, Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Chad border regions. Cargo. Medical supplies unauthorized. Status. Operation terminated due to regulatory pressure. Grace looked at Amara. Looked at the documents. Looked at Samuel, unconscious on the floor. You're Skybird, she whispered. The child pilot they'd been searching for across 3 countries. Amara nodded, her jaw set. He's my uncle. He taught me to fly when I was 8. We delivered medicine to villages that had no other way to get supplies. We saved people. It was illegal, but it was necessary. Now I need to save him and everyone else on this plane. Please, let me try. Grace looked at this tiny girl who barely came up to her shoulder, looked at the massive, complex cockpit of a Boeing 767, looked at the unconscious pilots. She had no choice. Can you really fly this? Amara climbed into the captain's seat on the left. Her feet barely reached the rudder pedals, even with the seat all the way forward. She was so small she could barely see over the instrument panel. Grace grabbed a blanket from the crew rest and folded it, placing it on the seat to give Amara more height. But despite her size, Amara's hands moved across the controls with absolute confidence. She scanned the primary flight display, the navigation display, the engine instruments. She checked fuel quantity, 3 hours, 40 minutes remaining. She verified the autopilot mode, altitude hold, heading select, auto throttle engaged. I've never flown a Boeing 767, Amara said quietly, her small hands resting on the control yoke. But I understand flight principles. I understand aircraft systems. I can do this. But I'll need help from air traffic control. Grace made another impossible decision. She picked up the PA microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have someone who can assist with flying the aircraft. Please remain calm, stay in your seats, and trust that we're doing everything possible to get everyone home safely. She deliberately didn't say it was a child. Not yet. Let people have hope. Then she turned to Amara. What do you need? Help me contact London Control. I need to talk to them. Grace helped Amara put on the captain's headset, adjusting it to fit her small head. Then Amara reached for the radio panel with one small hand. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She keyed the microphone. At London Area Control Center, Controller James Parker was having a routine night shift, 63 aircraft under his control, all tracking their routes perfectly. Weather was clear. Traffic was light. Then a voice came over the frequency that made him freeze. A child's voice, high-pitched, female, clearly young. London Control, British Airways 21. Both pilots are incapacitated. I am a passenger taking control of the aircraft. I need guidance for approach and landing. James stared at his radar screen, certain he'd misheard. British Airways 214. Say again. Who is speaking? My name is Amara Okafor. I am 12 years old. I have flight experience in small aircraft. I need help landing this Boeing 767. The entire control room fell silent. Every controller stopped what they were doing. Even the traffic on other frequencies seemed to pause. James looked at his supervisor, Angela Chen, who had walked over to listen. Her face was pale. British Airways 214, James said carefully, keeping his voice calm despite his racing heart. You're saying a 12-year-old child is currently at the controls of the aircraft? I have 847 hours of flight time in a Cessna Caravan. I understand flight principles and aircraft control. I know this is unusual, but both pilots are unconscious. I'm the only person aboard who can fly. I need you to guide me through the systems I don't know. Angela immediately picked up a phone, calling the tower supervisor, the airport emergency services, alerting everyone that they had a situation beyond anything they'd trained for. James had to verify this was real and that the child could actually control the aircraft. British Airways 214, we need to verify your capability. Who taught you to fly? There was a pause. Then the small voice came back, and James heard something in it, resignation maybe, or determination. Captain Samuel Okafor taught me. He's my uncle. He's the captain of this flight, currently unconscious on the cockpit floor. For the past 4 years, he's been running an illegal humanitarian operation, flying medical supplies to remote villages in West Africa. He taught me to fly when I was 8 years old, so I could help him. We've logged 847 hours together, delivering medicine to places no one else would go. My call sign is Skybird. Angela's eyes went wide. She grabbed James's arm. Skybird? The unauthorized pilot we've been trying to track down? The one Nigerian, Niger, and Malian authorities have been searching for. James keyed his microphone, his mind racing. Skybird, we need you to prove you can control this aircraft. Can you disengage the autopilot and make a standard rate turn to heading 090? In the cockpit, Amara's small hand reached for the autopilot disconnect button on the control yoke. She pressed it. The Boeing 767, 130 tons of metal, 200 souls aboard, was now under manual control by a 12-year-old girl who had never flown anything larger than a single-engine turboprop. Amara felt the weight of the controls through the yoke, much heavier than the Cessna, much less responsive. She'd studied this. Larger aircraft have heavier control forces, require more deliberate inputs. She turned the yoke gently to the right, applying a coordinated amount of right rudder pressure. The massive aircraft banked smoothly, the nose tracking around the horizon. She watched the heading indicator on the primary flight display, waiting for it to reach 090 degrees. At precisely 090, she rolled the wings level, neutralized the rudder, and held the new heading perfectly steady. On the radar screen at London Control, James watched BA214 execute a textbook-perfect standard rate turn. Smooth, coordinated, professional. Jesus Christ, he whispered. She's actually flying it. A 12-year-old is flying a 767. The tower supervisor's voice crackled over the intercom. James, what's the plan? James took a deep breath, making the biggest decision of his career. We guide her in. Step by step, we bring her home. For the next 47 minutes, Amara flew the Boeing 767 with constant radio guidance from James Parker. But it was the hardest flying she'd ever done. The Cessna Caravan weighed 4 tons. The Boeing 767 weighed 130 tons. The controls felt different. Heavier, less immediate in response. When she turned the yoke, there was a lag before the aircraft responded. When she adjusted power, the engines took longer to spool up or down. And she was so small. Her feet barely reached the rudder pedals, even with the seat all the way forward and the folded blanket giving her height. Grace had to help her adjust the rudder pedals forward as far as they would go. It was night. Landing in daylight was hard enough. Landing in darkness, when you couldn't see the ground clearly until the last moments, was exponentially harder. And the passengers behind her were terrified. Through the closed cockpit door, she could hear crying, praying, occasional screams of panic. But Amara had something most pilots didn't have: 847 hours of flying in impossible conditions. She had landed on dirt strips at night with no lights except what the Cessna's landing light illuminated. She had landed in crosswinds so strong that the Cessna weather-vaned on the ground, the wind trying to spin it like a toy. She had flown through thunderstorms, through dust storms, through conditions where visibility was measured in feet, not miles. She had landed on strips where one mistake meant death, strips on hillsides, strips surrounded by trees, strips so short that she had to touch down on the first 5 feet and stop in the last 5 feet. Compared to that, a 12,000-foot concrete runway with lights and ILS guidance should be easy, except she'd never flown a jet. And she was 12 years old, and 200 lives depended on the next hour. James became her lifeline, talking her through every step. Skybird reduced speed to 250 knots. Amara's small hands pulled the throttles back smoothly, watching the airspeed indicator on the primary flight display. 270 knots, 260, 250. Good. Now I need you to deploy the flaps to 5 degrees. The flap lever should be on the center pedestal between the seats. She found it, a lever with positions marked from 0 to 30. She moved it to the 5 position. She felt the aircraft's nose pitch down slightly as the flaps deployed, increasing drag and lift. She trimmed the nose back up to maintain level flight. Perfect. Now descend to 10,000 feet. Set 10,000 in the altitude window. Amara found the altitude selector, dialed in 10,000 feet, and pressed the altitude select button. The autopilot, which she'd re-engaged for altitude control while hand-flying heading, began a smooth descent. By now, the media had caught wind of the story. News helicopters were already airborne, circling in the airspace around Heathrow. Headlines were hitting websites worldwide: 12-year-old flying transatlantic jet, Skybird reveled, child pilot attempting emergency landing, miracle or disaster. 200 lives in hands of Nigerian girl. But inside the cockpit, Amara couldn't think about any of that. She could only focus on flying. James continued to guide her down through the altitude levels, each step bringing her closer to landing. At 5,000 feet, London spread out below them, an enormous sea of lights stretching to every horizon. Skybird, James's voice came through, gentle and encouraging. You're doing beautifully. I've been a controller for 22 years, and I've never seen a student pilot fly this well. Now comes the hardest part, the approach and landing. I'm going to talk you through every single step. Trust me, trust yourself, and trust the aircraft. You can do this. Amara's voice was quiet but steady. I'm ready. Good girl. First, we need to engage the instrument landing system. This will give you electronic guidance to the runway. Do you see the ILS button on the mode control panel? She scanned the panel, found the ILS button, pressed it. The flight director bars appeared on her primary display, showing her where to fly. Now reduce speed to 200 knots. Deploy flaps to 15. She pulled the throttles back further, moved the flap lever to 15. The aircraft slowed and stabilized. At 3,000 feet, James's voice, Skybird, it's time to lower the landing gear. There's a lever shaped like a wheel on the left side of the center pedestal. Can you see it? She found it. A wheel-shaped lever in the UP position. I see it. Pull it down, you'll feel the gear deploy, and 3 green lights should appear. Amara pulled the landing gear lever down. The Boeing 767 shuddered as the massive landing gear doors opened and the gear extended. She felt it through the controls, a heavy thunk that vibrated the entire aircraft. 3 green lights appeared: nose, left, right. Gear down and locked, she reported, her voice mimicking the professional tone she'd heard Uncle Samuel use thousands of times. Perfect, James said, genuine relief in his voice. Now flaps to 30, final landing configuration. Speed 160 knots. She moved the flap lever to 30 and adjusted power to maintain 160 knots. The aircraft was now fully configured for landing, gear down, full flaps, proper speed. At 2,000 feet, she could see the runway clearly. Runway 27 left, a long strip of concrete lined with approach lights. Every emergency vehicle at Heathrow was staged along the sides: fire trucks, ambulances, rescue equipment. At 1,000 feet, James's voice became even more gentle, like a father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle. Skybird, you're on perfect glide slope, perfect center line. Your speed is perfect. This is it, the last minute. At 50 feet above the runway, I'm going to tell you to pull the throttles to idle and raise the nose very gently. The main wheels will touch first, then the nose wheel comes down. After touchdown, I'll guide you through braking. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Amara said. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was clear. At 500 feet, she could see individual lights on the runway, people on the ground watching, news helicopters hovering in the distance. At 200 feet, the automated voice in the cockpit began calling out, "Altitude, 200. At 100 feet, 100. Amara's whole world narrowed to the runway ahead. Nothing else existed. Not the passengers behind her, not the media watching, not the consequences that would follow. Just the runway, just the landing. At 50 feet, 50, James's voice calm and steady. Throttles to idle, Skybird. Gently raise the nose. Amara's small hands pulled the throttles all the way back to the idle position. She applied gentle back pressure on the yoke, raising the nose just a few degrees. The Boeing 767 settled toward the runway. 20 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, the main wheels touched the concrete with a gentle chirp of rubber on pavement. Perfect. Amara held the nose up for a moment, letting speed bleed off, then gently lowered the nose wheel. Thrust reversers, James called. Pull the two levers behind the throttles up and back. She found them, pulled them. The engines roared as thrust reversers deployed, helping to slow the massive aircraft. Brakes, gradual pressure on the toe pedals. She pressed the tops of the rudder pedals, feeling the brakes engage. Gently at first, then more firmly as the aircraft slowed, the Boeing 767 rolled down runway 27 left. Slowing, slowing, slowing. It came to a complete stop 8,000 feet down the runway, with 4,000 feet of pavement still remaining. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the radio erupted with cheers from every controller in London Area Control. And behind her, through the cockpit door, Amara heard something that made tears spring to her eyes. The passengers were cheering, crying and cheering and applauding, because they were alive. All 200 of them. Alive. When Amara finally opened the cockpit door, she was immediately overwhelmed. Paramedics rushed past her, nearly knocking her over in their haste to reach Uncle Samuel and Rebecca. Both were still unconscious, but breathing. Passengers surged forward, wanting to see her, thank her, touch her. She was so small, she was nearly crushed by the crowd of adults pushing toward the front of the aircraft. Grace put a protective arm around her, physically holding back the surge of people. Please, give her space. Everyone stay back. But the emotions were too strong. People were crying, not from fear now, but from relief, from joy, from gratitude. A mother with 2 young children pushed through, tears streaming down her face. You saved my babies. Thank you, thank you. An elderly man grabbed her small hand in both of his. God bless you, child. God bless you. A businessman was recording on his phone, already uploading to social media. She's just a child. She's 12. She just landed a 767. Then new people arrived, not passengers, but officials, police, aviation authorities, airport security. A stern-looking woman in a Civil Aviation Authority uniform pushed through the crowd with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Amara Okafor. Amara looked up at her, exhausted, overwhelmed. Yes? I'm Inspector Sarah Williams, UK Civil Aviation Authority. You just operated a commercial aircraft without certification, without training, without authorization, in direct violation of every international aviation regulation. Your uncle has been operating illegal humanitarian flights for years, using you, a minor child, as crew. This is serious. You're both in serious trouble. The cabin went quiet. Inspector Williams continued, her voice hard. You endangered 200 passengers by taking control of an aircraft you're not certified to fly. The fact that you landed safely doesn't change the fact that what you did was illegal. Amara said nothing. She was watching paramedics load Uncle Samuel onto a stretcher. He was still unconscious, unable to defend himself, unable to defend her. Then something unexpected happened. The passenger who had thanked her, the mother with two young children, stepped forward. "Excuse me?" the woman said, her voice rising. "You're going to arrest her?" "She saved 200 lives." A man joined in. "That child is a hero. What she just did was nothing short of miraculous." Another passenger, louder. "Her uncle was delivering medicine to dying villages." "That's what was illegal? Saving people's lives?" The crowd turned, and suddenly Inspector Williams was facing angry passengers on all sides. "She's 12 years old, and she landed a 767. My children are alive because of her. How dare you threaten her? She deserves a medal, not arrest." Inspector Williams tried to maintain order. "The law is the law. Regulations exist for what?" a woman shouted. "To let people die on airplanes? To stop children from saving lives? Your regulations nearly killed us all. The media was filming everything, cameras capturing the confrontation. Within minutes, it would be on every news channel worldwide." Police eventually had to escort Amara, Grace, and the recovering pilots through a side door to avoid the crowd. But the story had already exploded. Within 6 hours, Skybird was trending worldwide on every social media platform. The video of the landing, filmed by news helicopters and passengers' phones, had been viewed 50 million times. Headlines everywhere. "Skybird saves 200. UK threatens prosecution. Nigeria's child Piotto hero, criminal or savior." 1, 2, YEAR. Oh, LD's illegal training saves lives. Now she faces charges. Within 24 hours, there was a petition with 2 million signatures. Pardon Skybird and Captain Okafor. Medical aid groups testified about the lives saved by Samuel and Amara's humanitarian flights. Villages across West Africa sent letters to UK authorities, but the aviation authorities were adamant. Laws had been broken. Serious laws. Laws that existed for good reasons. And they were right. An 8-year-old learning to fly was child endangerment. An uncertified pilot operating aircraft was dangerous. Running illegal humanitarian flights across international borders violated numerous regulations. Good intentions didn't change the facts. Amara and Uncle Samuel were both charged 6 months later. They stood in a London courtroom. Uncle Samuel had fully recovered from the food poisoning, as had Rebecca Hayes. Both were healthy, but Samuel's career was over. British Airways had terminated his employment immediately. No airline would ever hire him again. He'd broken too many rules, lied too many times. The charges were extensive. Illegal operation of aircraft, operating without proper certification, child endangerment, endangerment of passengers, immigration violations, customs violations, dozens of regulatory violations across multiple countries. The prosecution's case was straightforward and damning. They broke every rule in aviation, the prosecutor argued. Captain Okafor taught a small child, to fly dangerous missions in an illegal operation. Then that child, uncertified and untrained in commercial aircraft, took control of a Boeing 767 with 200 souls aboard. Yes, she landed safely. But what if she hadn't? What if her illegal training had proven insufficient? What if she'd crashed? Intent doesn't excuse illegality. Good outcomes don't justify criminal recklessness. It was a compelling argument. But the defense had witnesses. They brought villagers from Nigeria, Niger, and Mali who had traveled to London specifically to testify. Many had never left their villages before, had never seen a big city, but they came because they owed their lives to Skybird and her uncle. A village elder from Niger testified about a malaria outbreak in 2003. 43 children were dying. The government said they would send medicine, but it would take 2 weeks. Skybird landed during a thunderstorm. No lights on our strip, just fires we lit to guide her. She brought the medicine. All 43 children lived. A doctor from Mali described a snakebite epidemic. Carpet vipers. Deadly. We needed antivenom immediately. The roads were impassable from flooding. Skybird landed on a strip so short I wouldn't have believed it possible. 26 people lived because she flew when no one else would. A mother from Nigeria holding a healthy 6-year-old. My daughter would be dead from cerebral malaria. Skybird brought the medicine at night, landing on our strip with no lights. My daughter is alive because a small girl was brave enough to fly. They presented medical records showing 2,400 people who received life-saving treatment because of supplies delivered by the illegal operation. They brought passengers from BA214 who testified about Amara's professionalism during the emergency. Air traffic controller James Parker testified, "I've guided pilots with 20,000 hours who were less professional than that 12-year-old. She followed every instruction perfectly. Her aircraft control was textbook. She saved 200 lives." Uncle Samuel testified last. "I taught my niece to fly because I needed help saving lives. I knew it was illegal. I knew the risks. Was it right? I believe yes. Would I do it again?" He paused, looking at Amara. "No, because I've learned that you can't build something good on an illegal foundation. The lives we saved were real, but so were the laws we broke. We should have found a legal way. We didn't. That's on me, not her." Amara didn't testify. She was considered too young, but she submitted a written statement that the judge read aloud. "I flew because people were dying and we could help them. I landed the plane because 200 people needed someone to save them. I don't know if what I did was legal, but I know it was necessary. If saving lives is illegal, then maybe the law needs to change. But I understand that I broke rules, and rules exist for reasons. I'm sorry for breaking them, but I'm not sorry for saving people." The courtroom was silent when the judge finished reading. The verdict took 3 days. When it came, it reflected the impossible complexity of the situation. Guilty of operating aircraft without proper certification, guilty of operating illegal humanitarian flights, guilty of child endangerment, guilty of endangering passengers. The judge looked directly at Amara and Samuel. "You broke serious laws. Laws that exist to protect people, to protect children from exploitation, to protect passengers from unqualified pilots, to protect international borders and customs. These laws matter. But you also saved 2,400 people through your humanitarian flights. You saved 200 people on that aircraft. These lives matter too. The law demands, I recognize your guilt. But conscience demands I recognize your extraordinary circumstances." Sentence: suspended, conditional upon Captain Okafor's permanent retirement from all aviation activities, and upon Amara Okafor agreeing not to operate any aircraft until she is legally certified at age 18. He paused, looking at Amara with something like sadness. "Miss Okafor, you saved lives. You showed courage that grown pilots with thousands of hours would struggle to match. But you're 12 years old. You should be learning mathematics and playing with friends, not making life or death decisions at 37,000 feet. Use these 6 years to be a child. Get an education. Grow up. At 18, if you still want to fly, do it legally. Do it properly. You have a gift. Don't waste it by continuing down an illegal path. This court cannot condone what you did. But it acknowledges that sometimes, in extraordinary circumstances, people must choose between law and life. You chose life. That matters. Uncle Samuel lost everything: his career, his pilot's license, his income. Amara lost her wings, at least for 6 years, but they were both free. No prison, no criminal record that would follow them forever. The judge's suspended sentence was a recognition that morality and legality don't always align perfectly. Amara was 18 years old now, and she stood on the tarmac at a small airfield outside Lagos, watching mechanics service a twin-engine aircraft painted white with a red cross emblazoned on the tail. 6 years had passed since that night over the Atlantic. She had spent those years studying, getting a proper education at a British secondary school, taking mathematics and physics and literature, learning to be a normal teenager, or as normal as she could be, while being recognized everywhere as that girl who landed the 767. But she had also been preparing. At 16, the minimum age in the UK, she'd started proper flight training, not illegal night flights, but legitimate instruction with certified instructors at registered flight schools. She'd earned her private pilot license at 16, her instrument rating at 17, her multi-engine rating at 17 and a half, her commercial pilot license 2 weeks ago on her 18th birthday. All legal, all certified, all earned through proper training and official examinations. She was the youngest person in UK history to complete all commercial certifications. And the media had covered every step. Skybird returns to flying. Legally this time, teenage hero earns her wings properly, from illegal prodigy to licensed pilot. Major airlines had called within hours of her commercial license being issued. British Airways, Emirates, Ethiopian Airlines, they all wanted the publicity of hiring the girl who had saved 200 lives. She had turned them all down. Instead, she had returned to West Africa and approached Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, with a proposal. You need pilots for humanitarian missions. I know those routes. I know those villages. I know how to land on impossible strips. Let me help you do legally what my uncle and I did illegally. They had agreed immediately. And now, at 18, Amara was the flight operations coordinator for MSF's West Africa Humanitarian Aviation Program. She didn't fly the missions herself. Too much media attention, too recognizable. Every flight would become a news story instead of a medical mission. But she trained other pilots. She taught them the techniques Uncle Samuel had taught her, landing on impossible strips, how to judge distance, how to handle short field landings, how to calculate load factors on rough ground, flying in zero visibility weather, how to use instruments when visual references disappear, how to navigate by feel and sound and subtle cues, delivering medicine when no one else would, how to assess risks properly, how to make good decisions under pressure. The organization she'd helped create was called Skybird Medical Transport Initiative. It operated across West Africa, delivering supplies to many of the same villages she'd flown to illegally as a child. But now, everything was legal, certified, proper. They filed flight plans, they had proper medical cargo certifications, they paid customs fees, they saved lives the right way. Uncle Samuel worked with her. At 62, retired and unable to fly, he was the logistics coordinator. He used his decades of knowledge to plan routes, coordinate with villages, manage supplies. They had turned something illegal into something legitimate. On the first anniversary of the organization's founding, Amara visited a village in Niger she had last seen when she was 10 years old. The village elder, now much older, his hair completely white, recognized her immediately despite 6 years passing. The Skybird returns, he said in French, which Amara now spoke fluently. But you don't fly anymore? I still fly, Amara replied, just not the missions. I train others. Ah, the old man nodded. You multiply yourself, one skybird becomes many skybirds. Amara smiled. She hadn't thought of it that way, but it was true. She'd trained 17 pilots in the past year. Each one could reach villages she couldn't. Together, they accomplished more than she ever could alone. Does it bother you? The elder asked. Watching others fly the missions you used to fly? Amara considered the question. Sometimes I miss it. I miss the feeling of landing after a difficult flight, knowing we brought medicine that would save lives. I miss being in the cockpit making decisions, being the one who makes a difference. But I was a child doing an adult's job. What Uncle Samuel and I did was necessary then, but it wasn't sustainable. We were breaking laws, risking lives, including mine. This is better. Legal, safe, sustainable. We save more people this way. You've grown wise. Many adults never learn what you've learned. That evening, Amara sat alone in the cockpit of one of their aircraft, not flying, just sitting in the captain's seat, hands on the yoke, remembering. Uncle Samuel found her there. Thinking about that night, he asked, referring to British Airways 200 without needing to say it explicitly. Always, Amara admitted. I think about it every time I sit in a cockpit, every time I hear about an emergency, every time I train a pilot. Regrets. Amara thought carefully. I regret that we had to break laws to save lives. I regret that children died in some villages because we didn't know about them in time. I regret that you lost your career. Samuel sat in the right seat, the first officer's position he'd occupied when teaching her years ago. I don't regret my career. I regret that the system made illegal what should have been legal. But our operation, our flights, illegal. Yes. Wrong. No. The judge said we were guilty. We were. But guilt and morality aren't always the same thing. We were guilty of breaking aviation regulations. But we were moral in saving lives when no one else would. Amara looked at her uncle, older now, grayer, but still the man who had taught her that flying was like magic, but better because it was real. Do you think we did the right thing? She asked. All of it, the illegal flights, the training, everything. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. I think we did the necessary thing, he finally said. Not the legal thing, not the safe thing, but the necessary thing. And I think you took that lesson and made it better. You took an illegal operation and built a legal one. That's wisdom, Amara. That's growth. They sat in comfortable silence, two pilots who had saved thousands of lives through methods that weren't always legal, but were always necessary. The next morning, Amara stood on the edge of the dirt runway, watching one of her trainees, a 34-year-old Ghanaian pilot with 3,000 hours, prepare for a medical supply delivery to a remote village. Weather's bad, the pilot said nervously. Visibility's down, winds are gusting. Maybe we should scrub? Amara looked at the gray sky, felt the wind, assessed the conditions with 847 illegal hours plus 1,200 legal hours of experience. You can do it, she said. Use the techniques I taught you. Fly the approach by instruments until you break out visually. Trust your training. The village needs this medicine. People will die without it. You can do this safely. The pilot nodded, climbed into the aircraft, and took off. Amara watched the plane disappear into the gray clouds, carrying antibiotics that would save lives. She wasn't the one flying. But in a way, she was. Through every pilot she trained, through every technique she taught, through every mission the organization completed. She was still Skybird, just a legal one now. And somehow, that felt exactly right. That evening, she received a message from London. James Parker, the controller who had guided her that night 6 years ago, had sent an email. Amara, I saw the news about your organization. I'm proud of you. You took an impossible situation and turned it into something sustainable and legal. That night changed my life too, made me realize that sometimes rules and reality don't align perfectly, and we have to navigate that gap with wisdom. You're doing that. Keep flying, Skybird. The world needs pilots like you. James Amara smiled, saved the message, and returned to her work, planning routes, training pilots, coordinating deliveries. She had been a criminal at 12, a hero at 12. Now, at 18, she was simply a pilot doing her job, flying legally, flying properly, flying to save lives. Still Skybird, always Skybird. And the sky, infinite and blue and full of possibility, remained her home.